Welcome everybody to the edition of Safety Podcast. I'm Jason, I'm from Proud to Be Safe, and together with the team at WSH Asia, this podcast will be the platform where stories by workplace accident victims and their families are shared, including safety tips that should be taken into consideration for the working population. In this episode, we'll be speaking to Darren Brunton, the Managing Director of KB Associate Group of Companies, who is currently based in Singapore. So welcome down to the podcast.
Hi Jason, and thank you very much for having me here. It's fantastic.
Oh, you're very, very welcome. Could you tell a little bit of your background? Obviously, you've been based in Singapore. Is it for about 30 years?
Yeah, that's right, Jason. I've been here 30 years now. 1991 I came out to Singapore. Before that I was working in the British military. I was in the Corps of the Royal Engineers. I joined as a boy soldier, so basically I joined the military at 16 years old. Went through a 12-year career, of which I was with the Commando Forces, 3 Commando Brigade, 4-5 Commando and 5-9 Independent Engineer Squadron, based in Plymouth and in Arbroath. So on leaving the military, where I also learnt to dive, I wanted a diving career. So 2 fairly hazardous career paths, I think, I chose there. And that brought me out to Singapore and Asia, where I've been basically ever since.
Wow, that's fantastic. I take it you really enjoy it out there?
Yeah, it's certainly, when I first came over here, I thought, wow, I was on the flight, not really knowing where I was going in the sense of Asia. And back then, it was sort of what sort of culture we're going into. But when I landed, it was absolutely fantastic. It was a really a step forward in life, if you like. But obviously traveling around the world and traveling around Asia in the job I was doing, you're exposed to many dangerous situations and dangerous occurrences. Offshore in the oil and gas industry, commercial diving, and obviously in Singapore in the construction industry as well.
So it's bizarre. You're based out there in Singapore, and I'm here in the UK, and we've connected for a long time without actually meeting properly. So how did you sort of hear about Jason Anker and Proud to Be Safe? What did you know of us?
Well, actually, if you recall, we did meet about 10 years ago at one of the leading safety conferences back in UK. I'm an IOSH member, used to be the chairman of the branch here in Singapore for many years. So I travelled back to UK for the annual conference, and you were there speaking. I think it was probably one of your first presentations and talks, if I remember rightly.
I can remember now, Darren. Yes, that was actually one of my very first solo presentations I actually gave. I think it was 2010, in the February of 2010, for an Irish event. Yeah, I can really remember. I was very, very nervous. Obviously,
you were
the beginning of my speaking journey. And I suppose back then it was all a case of me not actually knowing what these presentations by people who unfortunately have had an accident. I was sort of still then unaware of the power or the potential power and impact speakers like myself can have.
Well, very much so, Jason. And I think at that particular conference, there was 2. There was yourself and another guy who was injured during the Afghan war. And you particularly came on stage, and just the courage for you to get there. You were in an audience of a couple of hundred safety professionals where the message really was taken on board, but also heartfelt, because obviously that was their passion of preventing such injuries. And you were there to share your story, and it was such a powerful and a good story to share, and the courage for you to do so certainly was well received.
Oh, thank you. And I suppose what you're alluding to there is actually will form some of the other questions as we go through. So obviously, with you being based out in Singapore for such a long time, it'd be really great for the listeners and even myself really to understand the difference between West and East when we're talking about workplace accidents. So from your experience of sort of understanding both sides, What sort of some of the similarities and the differences between the two?
I think it's going to be very similar in the sense of when somebody has an incident or an accident like yours, a life-changing event, or even a fatality, and the family members are then affected. It's something that you go through those stresses. I can't imagine what you went through personally. You share it a lot, but you go through those stresses which many people will struggle with because of the culture, because of their community they're in, and the just the people around them. It goes from the legalities of it all the way down to the family around, and how can somebody share something like that when they probably got a lot of guilt about it? And in the Western culture, we say East and West, right? In the European side, people are much more vocal. You look at the vocalities about human rights and things like that. You look at if somebody gets injured, they want to make more of a claim about it, possibly. The legalities are maybe a bit swifter, although they do take time, obviously. But they're probably more vocal. And then in the Asian community and societies, there's a little bit more reserved, in the sense of, well, if I step forward and voice out and share my story, basically, if whatever career I have is gone, whatever career my family, whatever income my family may get won't happen, because the people of the organisations I want to go and work for, or I need to, they'll think of me as probably not a disruptor rather than proactive. So there's many different situations, and I think they would be in both communities, both sectors, both countries and nationalities, but probably more heavily in an Asian community. I mean, I've been over here a long time. I've seen or I've heard and read many accidents and incidents. I've been involved with various investigations as well, and they're extremely upsetting, and I can imagine the challenges that are there for somebody like yourself to come forward and share.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose a question to you, with your experience of being out there for such a long time, do you think there's an appetite? Do you think it would be of value for an accident victim from your region to come forward and present in front of an audience?
Well, I think certainly, you look at what happens in other countries, in Canada, in Australia, in UK, in Europe, and in Asia. There have been a couple of videos made of victims of workplace incidents, be it the actual victim or a family member, where that incident turned into a fatality. It affects a whole family, as you well experienced. So there's an extremely powerful story there, and the mindset needs to be set that by sharing that story, it's certainly not a negative, and people are not seeing it that way nowadays. They're seeing it more as a heartfelt story. Wow, I need to learn from this, and the message we can take on board. Unfortunately, in our communities and in our human beings, we still have those people who will victimize those individuals or cause disruption against them. But in the big picture, there's so much more positivity and so much more that can be done by sharing a story like that. If you've made a mistake, one of the things makes it, well, I made that mistake and it was my fault. Well, then that's a big burden to carry, much like you carry, I'd imagine. But then by sharing that, you release that stress, you release that traumatic disorder, that stress that you have, because you're now sharing it to make good and hopefully saving somebody else's life.
Well, that was a fantastic response, actually, Darren, because that's exactly what this is. What we're not looking for is people just to go over their story of their accident and explain in detail what went wrong on the day, because we've all sort of seen these videos and they're very, very short-lived, if any impact whatsoever. And I think the impact from a story is the effect it has on themselves, but also the families, because no matter where we travel around the world, family is the most important thing to everybody. But again, you've touched on it in your answer to a previous question, which is actually going to lead into my next question: is what is in it for the injured person speaking up? What's in it for him?
Well, that's right. There's two sides, maybe more than two sides. If you've injured yourself in a workplace incident because it was your fault, you lapsed in safety, then I'm embarrassed. What am I going to do? How am I going to share that and face that because it was my fault? And then there's the other flip side where it was the employer's duty of care and they failed. And then they're going through a court process that can take up to years. But how can you still share that story? You still need to make a living. You still need to earn money. You can still do so. But obviously there's processes to put in place. Now, what you've done in your journey has been absolutely, it's taken a long time, right? 10 years since we first met and you started this journey. And I think at the first you were probably a little bit rocky in what direction you're going to take and how you're going to do it. But if somebody can look at you as that showcase, as that lesson to be learned from you, okay, this is how you're going to inspire others. So how can you then turn that into a passion and revenue? There's many ways. This is not necessarily about money making, but at the end of the day, your family have to survive, right? So there's many ways, and with right coaching and the right people to take you through that process, then there's success at the end of the story. It's all very well coming through that trauma of being injured and what the world falling around you, your family breaking up and everything like that. Once you've got through that, it's what you're going to do next. How can we then grow and reach the sky's the limit, and earn money, but in doing so, share that powerful story so somebody else doesn't get injured. Particularly now, you look at the situation we're in now with COVID, and everybody's now going back to work. And particularly in Singapore, we've had many more incidents here and fatalities, sadly, than what we should ever be thinking about or expecting for the time of year. We always go for zero, but unfortunately that's not happening, and certainly not now. So where people are going back to work now, that's when people like you need to come in and share your stories to twitch that light bulb on and everybody stay alert. So there's so much to positive attitude, positive mindset that can be gained. So it's not just about earning revenue, but it's about, money's good, but actually what you get out of what you do, I think, is the value of sharing your story and seeing that you've made a difference, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We could go on talking forever around that because we're both on the same page. I mean, I think it's about time we all turned over a new leaf, So if any companies out there know of anybody, or if you're an accident victim yourself, or you know of someone who needs to tell a story, please get in touch with the SafeTea Podcast, because we're here to help you by giving you a voice. So thank you very much for your time today, Darren. It's been absolutely fantastic, and we look forward to the next podcast. Thank you.
Hey mate, it's absolutely been a pleasure, and I really, really look forward to the next time. Thank you very much.